I'm TGC Tunes and I am a modular synth artist. What is a modular synth artist? Well, it's a musician that creates electronic music with a modular synthesizer, like for example the one you see behind me. So a modular synthesizer is a way of building an instrument out of all sorts of different modules, typically by different manufacturers and some which I've made myself. And you create your own very custom specific instrument, and then you patch it together with different wires, and that's all the wires that you see behind me as well. And the amazing thing about it is that every time you repatch it or rewire it, you're effectively creating a new and interesting instrument. So the music I create is, obviously it's all electronic, but some of it's quite experimental. So I like to conduct what I call experiments, and by that I mean I devise a new way of creating some music or a sound or maybe a sequence of notes. And sometimes I do interesting things like create an experiment, for example, where I take a radio and I'm feeding in some random radio station and I take the sound from it and I'm feeding it into my modular synthesizer and I'm chopping it up and manipulating it and turning it into something new. So basically I like to try and do something different and interesting and use that as a starting point for my music.
But to be in there for the first time, really saying,
people often associate modular synthesizers with analog synthesizers and assume that they're all analog, but actually some of the most interesting modules are actually digital. So there are some digital synthesizers in there, so using techniques, for example, like samples and wavetables and what we call FM synthesis or frequency modulation synthesis. And some of them I built myself from kits, doing the soldering and so on myself. So really you create a very unique instrument, but the way that these modules all talk to each other or are used together is you connect them all together with patch cables, which is why when you look at a modular synth setup, there's lots of cables everywhere. Otherwise they wouldn't do anything, they wouldn't send any signals to each other. So really it's kind of like you're creating an electronic circuit with these cables. Because cables are such a fundamental part of it, you start getting into like, what's the length of cable? Are you going to have a color scheme? Are you going to use right-angled cables? Are you going to use stackable cables that let you split a connection into two? Or are you going to have a different kind of adapter that lets you split a connection into two? Are you going to have a cable where you've got an attenuator built into the cable, and so on and so on? So, which actually means you're almost like creating a new instrument every time you repatch the modular synthesizer and each time you rewire it, because depending how you do that, it will behave in very different ways. So you can see it's an endless source of interesting ways of connecting things together and creating music in different ways. So it's a very physical way of being creative by plugging things together. So my creative process normally involves doing something that's, like I mentioned before, an experiment or something creative with sound or a sequence or notes. And typically that will involve creating a new patch on the modular. A patch is where you wire it up in a different way, hopefully to create something that's unique in some way, so a unique sound or a unique modulation or some kind of strange effect. But often it starts with experiments and then iterating on those experiments in a live environment. The nature of what I do with the modular synthesizer is that you can never reproduce exactly what you did before anyway, so that I try to make every performance completely unique and I never actually know exactly what's going to happen. then sometimes that's something unique that I've never done before, and sometimes that can be really magic. So I suppose that's my favourite kind of moment performing. I did a concert with an artist called RJ, and he plays a number of unusual acoustic instruments. So what we were doing was we were combining my modular synth electronic music with a number of different acoustic instruments. I'm pretty sure some of those combinations were never done before. We can't play this one for too long because RJ may pass out because it's that hard work.
It's okay, we have a doctor in house.
Okay. I think that music is something that creates and stirs and evokes emotion in people. And I think, you know, people might think that maybe electronic music isn't so kind of emotional as other kinds of music. But I guess that for me, any sound and anything that you hear can kind of invoke emotion, and music is the way that I like to do that and create that. I've chosen to create electronic music because I want to create something, and I love that exploration of being able to try different things and just be able to create something really and then share that with people. That's something I'm obviously really passionate about, and that's why I do it.